It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. If you thought that the Republican Party's behavior in trying to elect a Speaker of the House was bad, wait until you hear what they are prepared to do over raising the debt ceiling. Their actions are reckless, short-sighted, and quite possibly unconstitutional. I'll get to that. But first, a bit of background. The debt ceiling allows our government to pay its bills, its ongoing obligations, and its debts. It first came about, at least formally, during World War I, when a debt limit of $11.5 billion was established to help America pay for the war. So there are understandable reasons for deficit spending, like an expensive war. But since then, the debt has grown a lot, and the ceiling, the limit on that debt, has grown to keep up. Both Republican and Democratic administrations have contributed. But here's where the hypocrisy of Republicans comes into it. They are now threatening to hold the American economy, and by extension, the world economy, hostage by blocking any attempt to raise the debt ceiling unless they get their way on spending cuts. But really, the debt ceiling is about our ability as a nation to pay for obligations we have already incurred. It would be like a married couple racking up a ton of credit card debt and then one of them saying, "We're not going to pay the bill." Here's the worst part. A huge chunk of our national debt, the debt that Republicans say they don't want to pay, was racked up under the Trump administration. Republicans, it turns out, only seem to care about deficit spending when a Democrat is in the White House. Under Trump's presidency, the national debt increased by nearly $8 trillion. That's almost $24,000 in additional debt for every single American. Fully 25% of our entire debt is from a single one-term president, Donald Trump. And most of that happened before the COVID-19 pandemic, as the Trump administration, abetted by Republicans in Congress, enacted massive tax cuts that benefited the wealthiest Americans. Today, our national debt, relative to the size of our economy, is the highest it has been since World War II. And that is largely because of Donald Trump. Yet here we are, with a Republican Party that suddenly cares about deficit spending and is threatening to undermine the full faith and credit of the United States. That is what raising the debt ceiling is ultimately about. It's about meeting the obligations our country has already made. And if we don't, if America defaults on its debt, the results would be catastrophic, not just for the stock market, but for everyday Americans, anyone who receives a Social Security check, anyone trying to borrow money. The entire global economy would be thrown into chaos. Republicans appear to think risking all that is worth it. Here's where the constitutional issue comes in. The 14th Amendment states that the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. I'm not a law professor, but I do have a law degree from Yale, and quite a few legal scholars have argued convincingly that the language of the 14th Amendment is clear. Nothing shall interfere with the validity of America's debt obligations. We have to pay it. What's especially striking about the relevance of the 14th Amendment to the current crisis is what it says about how far the Republican Party has fallen. The 14th Amendment was passed in 1868 in the aftermath of the Civil War as an attempt by the United States government to limit efforts by southern states to restrict the rights of newly freed slaves. This is the amendment that grants citizenship to those born or naturalized in the United States and provides for equal protection under the law. Interestingly, it also includes a provision prohibiting anyone who engaged in insurrection against the United States from holding elected office. The debt clause was added to guarantee that debts incurred by Congress in waging and winning the Civil War were paid, and that any future Congress, say one dominated by former Confederate states, couldn't ignore the federal debt and guarantee Confederate debt instead. The whole idea behind that amendment was to guarantee equal protection under the law and to strengthen the Union. And its passage was driven by a once great Republican Party. Now, look where we are. Not even the prospect of economic catastrophe will stop Republicans from trying to undermine President Biden's ability to govern. I remember when the Republican Party claimed to be the one devoted to fiscal responsibility. To the Republicans listening, I have to ask, what about not paying one's debts is responsible? What about slashing taxes for the wealthy while increasing spending, as happened during the Trump administration, is conservative? And what about ignoring our history and the Constitution itself is honorable? Maybe the only thing more frustrating than Republican hypocrisy here is the cowardice of their leaders. The reason our economy is approaching the brink is because Kevin McCarthy, in his quest to become Speaker, made a backroom deal with the extremists in his caucus, allowing them to hold our economy hostage. And we know what happens when you give in to extremists. Joe Biden and congressional Democrats are 100% right to hold their ground on this one. When it comes to living up to our debt obligations and maintaining the full faith and credit of the United States, there's nothing to negotiate, because the cynicism and cowardice now on display by Republicans in Washington is not just outrageous, it's dangerous.
Our blue wall stopped the red wave and election deniers got denied election. That's why we're celebrating with the new Democracy Prevails team. We've got lots of work to do, but we should all be proud that when democracy was tested, democracy prevailed. You've earned this. Don't wait. Get yours right now at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.